Hi, brothers. Welcome in. We're just going to give it about 5 minutes until we start. We'll let everyone get into the room, and then I'll hand it off to Jim Link. So just wait patiently, and we'll start soon. Hi, brothers. Once again, we'll just give it a few more minutes. There's still people coming on. We'll start here in just a second. Thank you for waiting. All right, welcome everyone. Welcome everyone to the Summit Series. We're super excited to have you all. We're very happy to have Jim Link with us here tonight. I think for most of you, he doesn't really need an introduction. I think a lot of you all know who he is, but he will get to that. So once again, thank you all. My name is Jake Luke. I serve as the Director of Expansion for our international headquarters, and I'm super excited to have helped bring this series to you all and have you understand a little bit more where recruitment could be in the future, where it might be, where it is, as well as how we're incorporating new member education into this experience and what it really means for our men and our brothers. So with that, I do want to introduce Jim Link and let him take it away. So thank you all. Enjoy. Jim, here you go.
All right. Thanks, Jake. Rock Chalk. Brothers, it's an honor to be with you today. I'm going to give a little bit of, since we're all floating boxes here in Zoom, I'm going to give a little bit of context of where I am. So I'm actually down in the panhandle of Florida right now, where I've been for the last 3 months. So my home is in Minneapolis, which is the center of the news world right now. And we'll talk about that in a little later in the presentation. And I went to Ohio Wesleyan, but I actually wanted to start off because it just happens in our townhome down here. I have a book called The Century. And this was a book about the 20th century. And I just been reading it when I was down here. And someday there will be a book written about the current century. And there will be a considerable section about the pandemic that we're going through right now. And you are all in a unique situation in that a very small percentage of people, as we're going through this, are in leadership positions. And for those of you that are in charge of recruiting and in charge of member education, you are in leadership experiences. And doing it in a time of crisis, it's tough. But it's also an amazing opportunity. So I know some of you are missing internship opportunities, but let me tell you that the experience that you're going to get in these positions will be internship worthy. And I used to do recruiting for a major corporation, and trust me, you're going to have some great stories to be able to tell based upon this experience. So thank you for taking on a leadership position in such a difficult and challenging time. So let me set some further context here because I'm not alone in this room, as is how things are currently. So at my feet is Jed the dog. There are windows around me that with lots of squirrels. So at any time you can see Jed explode with barking. I'll try to get him under control, but he can only be contained. He can't be controlled. There are other characters around me, so I'm going to give you the, all my kids are in college or gone, so I'll give you the Link family org chart. So it starts with Jed, who reports up to me, and I am a dotted line report up to my wife, who is a direct report to the cat. So any of those characters could show up at any time during the presentation. So just so you know, everybody who's there. The other context that I want to give you is a little bit about my background, because I'm going to tell a lot of stories today, and those stories as a way to demonstrate a number of the principles in building courageous leaders. And so it'll help to know a little bit about my background. So this is my career journey. So I actually started off as extremely shy kid growing up in a farm town outside of Buffalo, New York, with two devious sisters who used to do things with balloons, like in this picture. I was pre-med at Ohio Wesleyan, and realized that there wasn't anything called chief creative surgeon. I had a lot of creative ability. So I went into the very creative field of banking, where the only thing I would have been worse at as a doctor was a banker, and eventually went on to become working in PR and a writer. Now, during that whole period of about 6 years, I was getting my MBA at Michigan State. So it was about 24 classes I had to take because I was pre-med as an undergrad. Eventually, I got my MBA and went on to Minneapolis, St. Paul, and worked for a company called General Mills. So if you're familiar, Wheaties, Yoplait, Cheerios, and I helped invent and worked on products like Reese's Peanut Butter Puffs and fruit roll-ups and products like that, which I guess makes me one of the world's leading contributors to diabetes and tooth decay, unfortunately. I left General Mills at the age of 33 and started my own idea company. So if that sounds pretty bizarre, it was at the time. And I called my company Idea Link, and that's what I've been doing for the last 26, 27 years, is helping corporations generate new product ideas, helping them refine those ideas with consumers and with customers, and then market those ideas, where I work with ad agencies and figuring out positioning. So really an idea company is what I do. This is a little bit of my life pre-COVID. I would travel the world working with international teams, sometimes having them come with me. So clockwise from the top, that's me in India. That's my office in Stillwater, Minnesota, where I have groups in where we generate ideas. That's the team from China that came in to see me. Bottom right corner, that's me down in Panama with Latin American team, me in Japan, and then me back in the Twin Cities. So a big part of what I do is I help companies invent new ideas. I help them create concepts. I help them market those concepts. I was also fortunate enough to be part of, those are some of the companies, by the way, I forgot I had this slide. So these would be some of the companies that I work with. So, command strips at 3M was something that I got a chance to work on. Starbucks, Levi's, Best Buy, Pepsi. So hopefully some of these are familiar to you. But one of the things that I'm most proud of that I've got to work on was the development of building courageous leaders. Now, typically what I do is I present this for about an hour and 20 minutes at Fiji Academy is where I usually present this. I'm not going to be able to present the full thing today. So there's going to be elements of it that I'll share with you that are similar to how I might present it. But in some cases, I'm just going to be describing what it is. Because more than anything, what I want you all to have is an understanding of what the program is, how it works, what some of the content is. So you'll be able to market it and explain it both to rushies and to be able to talk about it as part of member education. So it's not going to be exactly the way that I would normally do it. The other thing, unfortunately, is my notes are back in Minneapolis right now, so some of it I'll be winging from memory. But here's what I'm going to go through. I'm going to talk about the origin of building courageous leaders. So how did it actually even come about? Like, how did it start? How is it different? So how is this different and I think better than what other Greek organizations are doing with their programs? We'll talk about what the skill set is involved, because there actually is a unique or particular set of skills that you pull out of building courageous leaders that you can apply during your college days and then afterward. And then we'll talk about, what is the relevance to you? What is the relevance to you and to all the members of the chapter, both now and as you move on in life? And then we'll do some questions, but we'll also, I want to get your thoughts about what might be some key talking points during recruitment phase, but also during pledge education. So that's the outline for today. And we'll go ahead and get started. And I think we'll pause. I don't know if we'll pause during it to get questions. I think Jake's recommendation was that we'll go to the very end and then take questions at the end. So I'm thinking the content piece for me will probably go maybe about 35 minutes. And then we'll do some discussion and have some questions. So first thing about the origin. So we looked at this, we actually started developing this in around 2015. And I worked with a group of graduate brothers from across the fraternity, but also we involved some undergraduates as well. And what we really wanted to do was find the intersection of three things. What is relevant and meaningful today? What is authentic and what is unique. And the place that we first put our focus is what was relevant. And so what was it that was needed in the world? And we took a look in politics, the business world, campus, across a lot of realms in the world. And one of the ones that came up again and again was this idea of courage and of courageous leadership. And we looked at it and said, is anybody else out there in the Greek world talking about courage and courageous leadership? And lo and behold, nobody was. So it was unique. And then we looked in our past and saw that in prior academies and prior ecclesias, leading with courage had been a recurring theme. And so we knew that we had found our sweet spot with a program with something that was relevant, authentic, and unique. From there, it was introduced in 2015, and then over the years since then, we've added to the content. We're increasing the frequency that we're talking about it. We're reaching more and more brothers with it. I think initially we just talked to the officers, and now I think we're going to be reaching more and more of the chapter through testing point training and bystander training and some of the other things that we're bringing into the chapter, and then continual reinforcement through the graduate brothers. So that's a little bit of the origin and where we are. And if you have some questions as we get toward the end about, what are some of the programs that we're doing related to B.C.L., we can talk about that at the end. And I think Lauren can certainly chime in on some of the things that are going. All right, so let's talk about the difference. And this is, I think, one of the key elements, particularly for those of you who are involved in recruiting, is, how do we talk about building courageous leaders versus what's happening with other Greek organizations. And so here's a little bit the way I talk about the difference is if you think about really any kind of organization, whether it's a company or whether it's another Greek organization, they all talk about having some kind of leadership training, and they all talk about having values, and that's a good thing. So if you're, part of another fraternity, they'll tell you, here are our values, and memorize your values. And they might talk a little bit about leadership and, what different leadership skills. And these are all good things. But where they end is where we begin. And it really starts with this idea of testing points. And so hopefully you all know the definition of testing points. If you don't, I'll repeat it here. So a testing point is any situation that challenges your values. So where your values, where you know them, but this particular situation is such that it challenges you to actually follow through on your values. And this is really where courageous leadership training is. And we use this quote by C.S. Lewis that you probably have seen, which is, courage is not just one of the virtues, but it's the form of all virtues at the testing point. And this is a really, really important quote, because what it's essentially saying is, what good is it to have values when at the point when you most need those values, you abandon them? So really think about that, is what good is it to have values if the point at which you most need them, which is the testing point, you abandon them? And so that's what we're really about, is what happens after that testing point. So another paraphrasing of this would be, there's a Mike Tyson quote that said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. It's another way of saying, everybody says they have values until they hit the testing point. So what we like to talk about is where other organizations are about learning values and memorizing values. We're really about living your values, and living your values. Again, the most difficult point to do that is where they are tested. So when we talk about the skills, the stuff on the left is easy, right? Well, leadership is easy if you're untested. Values are easy if they're untested. We like to think that we're doing the hard stuff, the skills that are required, that once your values are tested, that you power through those, that you know how to approach those, and you know how to do the right thing when it comes there. So however you guys want to talk about this difference, but really one of the things I point out is the stuff on the left is easy, the stuff on the right is hard. The stuff on the right requires courage. And our hope is, with this training, that you will come out of your years with Phi Gamma Delta with a particular set of skills that not only makes you, a better brother, a better chapter officer, a better contributor to your campus, but also just a future better employee, a better human being. All right, so let's talk about what these skills are. And so the first part of the skill is the recognition of testing points. And as part of building out this program, we broke these into 4 different testing points, types of testing points. So stance, intervention, opportunity, and accountability. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of these testing points, give you some stories and some examples to give you a feel for each one, what each one is like. And then, as you become more familiar with these, you will see examples of these, not only in the chapter, not only on campus, but as you're watching the news, you'll be able to say, there's a testing point of intervention. There's a testing point of opportunity. There's one of accountability. There's one of stance. So you will, as you become indoctrinated on this, you will forever look at the world differently. So let's take a look at stance. So stance is the courage to publicly profess your values, beliefs, or opinions, especially when in the minority. These are testing points that pose risks associated with speaking out or expressing a contrary opinion. It's something as simple as, voicing your opinion in class, or, speaking up when you hear a racist joke, or it could be somebody that's ripping on a friend who's not there, and they're ripping on them and they're saying something unfair about that friend, that is an example of stance. So I'm going to tell you a story from my past that has to do with stance. So as I mentioned in my beginning story, I spent 6 years working on my MBA. So it was 24 classes. I was working full time, and it was brutal. So I'd work all day. I'd go to 3 hours of class in the evening. I'd get home about 10 o'clock at night, and I'd sit at my crappy little desk and have to pull out an accounting book or a finance book and start studying. About 2 years into this 6-year slog, I went to a presentation by a company by the name of Leo Burnett. So Leo Burnett at the time was the top ad agency in Chicago. And they passed out this recruiting poster that had all the equity characters that they had created, like Snap, Crackle, Pop, and Tony the Tiger, and Marlboro Man, Charlie the Tuna. And so I had this poster up above my desk, and this was the thing that kept me going. So for the next 4 years, my dream was to get into Leo Burnett. Eventually, they came onto campus, and I interviewed Leo Burnett, and I was given the opportunity to actually go to Chicago and interview with Leo Burnett. So, you know, growing up out in the country and then later in blue collar towns, you know, this was quite a big step for me. So there is the Leo Burnett building in Chicago. That arrow was probably more or less where I was interviewing. So you go there and you interview, and the way the interview works, and some of you may have had an interview like this, is you are, it's 7 one-hour interviews. And I remember my sponsor there told me, he said, Jim, you're gonna have 7 people, each one's gonna be an hour long. And the very last one is going to be the most important. And so you got to make sure that you have your energy up for the last one, because the last one is the vice president. So here I am, I'm 1 day away from achieving my 6-year dream. And I go through the first 6 interviews, and, you know, sometimes you just know you're nailing the interviews. And I was just absolutely nailing it. And so I've got 6 under my belt. I've got 1 more 50-minute interview to go, and the job, at least I'm feeling, is mine. So I'm about halfway through the interview with the VP, and I had noticed up on his walls were framed pictures of cigarette ads. And so clearly this was a guy who, that was his account. So again, about halfway through the interview, he asked me the question. He said, how would you feel about working on a cigarette ad, on working on a cigarette account? And that was a moment where I'm thinking, all right, like, you know, this is that moment, like, how am I going to answer this question? And as a little bit of backdrop is, you know, I had, my mom smoked and had parts of her nose removed. I had a mother, I recently got married, and my mother-in-law had part of her lung removed. I had an uncle who golfed with, you know, pulling a tank behind him. And so I had some real problems with cigarette smoking. And, but he asked me honestly, you know, how did I feel about it? And, you know, I thought I would share my stance on cigarette smoking. And I said, if you could convince me that the results of my efforts working on that business would not cause anybody new to smoke cigarettes and would only cause people to switch from one brand to another, I would consider it. Well, that was not the answer he wanted to hear, and he immediately stiffened up in his chair, and an argument ensued. And I wasn't going to back down from the guy, because this is what I believed. The interview didn't go well, you know, and here I was 30 minutes away from, you know, a 6-hour journey from getting this job. So I get a call the next day, and it's my sponsor, and he says, you know, we'd like to have you back one more time. And he goes, the reading on you was very split. And I said, what was it? 4-3, 5-2. And he goes, nope, it was 6-1. And at that point, I knew what had happened. And he said, and I said to him, I said, I'm not interested. I'm not interested. in coming. So it was one of those moments where I lost the job, but I found myself, and that's what stance is about. And the lesson for me on that one is this: when you stand up to your values, is what you gain in the long term far exceeds what you lose in the short term. So I lost the job, but that was life changing for me, and that was the time from that point on. I stood up for what I believed in. And so stance, can be something really simple. It's simple as standing up in class and giving your viewpoint. But there are moments in your life where standing up for what you believe in and is life-changing for you. That was one of those moments for me. So that's stance. Let's talk about intervention. So intervention is actually probably the most difficult of all of it. And this is courageously embracing risk to actively stop or prevent an event or behavior. And these testing points offer the potential to positively change the course of history. So an example, intervening to stop a dangerous tradition, even though your action might prove unpopular at the time. So let's talk about a very difficult subject right now. I woke up this morning and my city was on fire. I'm not up there right now, but this is where I live. This is my town. This is where my kids were raised. So I've been here for 32 years. And you guys all know this story, and this is disturbing in so many ways. And it's something that we could talk for hours about, all the different very important and disturbing aspects of this story. But as it relates to intervention, one of the more shocking ones was that there were 3 officers watching this unfold. 3 officers who knew this was wrong, who knew what was happening to Mr. Floyd, who did not intervene. And it took one of them to have the courage to step in and stop this officer from doing what he was doing. And all of this could have been prevented. And so when I see moments like this, I think about the testing point of intervention, and I think about what the culture must be like in the Minneapolis Police Department that allows that sort of behavior. And I think all of us on the outside look at that and say, how could that happen? How could someone not jump in and do what was right and save this man's life and stop this horrible event from happening? But we have our own cultural issues as well that require intervention, and hazing is one of those. So the 4 young men on this screen all have something in common in that they're not with us. So these are 4 pledges who in the fall of 2017 lost their lives in the name of brotherhood. So these were all victims. These are all victims of hazing. On this next slide are all the ones who were charged. And again, some of these were charged and were later exonerated, but all of them are on the internet. These pictures are all there. So these were all the ones that were perpetrators. These are the ones involved in it. So you got your victims, you've got your perpetrators, and there's a third slide here that's part of this story. And that third slide are the bystanders. And there's a fourth slide. And that fourth slide only needs one person to make all these other slides go away. And that's the courageous leader. So that's the one who intervenes in these hazing situations and can prevent all of this from happening. And it'll be interesting during the Q&A. We can talk a little bit about what makes intervention so difficult. But for those of you, all of us play a role in this if we see this happening in our chapters. But I would say that the onus is particularly on those of you who are in recruitment and pledge education, because you are bringing these brothers into our fold, and you are bringing them to become part of our organization under the name of brotherhood. And it is your obligation to keep them safe. It is your obligation to, if you see something happening in your chapter where one of these brothers are endangered in any way or being hazed in any way, to be courageous and step forward and prevent things from happening. So I wish we could have a back and forth discussion on this, and it's difficult to talk about this in a Zoom conference. But intervention is the mother of all testing points, and it is also the one that is most relevant to those of you who are on the call with me today. So, and again, I'll just leave it at that, but I wish I could be there in person where we could have a conversation about this. So let's talk about another type of testing point that's different from the first two, which is the testing point of opportunity. And this is courageously embracing risk to create or start or support something new and different. So this is really what an entrepreneur does. So anytime you're an entrepreneur and you're starting a new business, anytime you try something new on your campus, some kind of new event, that is a testing point of opportunity, because anytime you're doing it, there is the chance that something could fail, right? Or it won't work, or somebody could laugh at you, or you could lose money. So there is always risk involved in opportunity. So let me give you a couple examples of ones, a couple involving brothers, and then another one that I'd just like to talk about. So Ecclesia about 3 years, or probably is 4 years ago now, was in Fenway Park, and I happened to sit down in an open chair, and there was an undergraduate brother sitting there. It just happened that his name is Daoud Baz, and he just happens to be from my chapter at Ohio Wesleyan. And so I sat next to Daoud and was asking him a little bit about, where he was from and how his summer was. And so Daoud is actually from Afghanistan. So he was born and raised, still lives in, or is living in Afghanistan. And I asked him if he had been back to Afghanistan recently. And he said, yeah, I was just there this summer, but I had to come back. So I had him tell me the story about Afghanistan. So what Daoud had done was he decided that he would go to Afghanistan and to start a new organization, to start a nonprofit. And the goal of that nonprofit was to teach village elders in Afghanistan about the importance of educating girls and women, and to talk about how a different interpretation of the Quran could actually reinforce the idea that the education of women was right and the right thing to do. So he started this nonprofit, and he's working with the village elders and doing this teaching. Well, eventually the word gets around that this young man from America is talking about educating women, and he becomes very unpopular, and there's a lot of chatter. And eventually a letter is delivered to his family. And the way a letter is delivered in Afghanistan is not the normal way. It gets thrown through the window. So for those of you that can't speak Farsi, I've Daoud translated there on the right. So I'll let you go ahead and read this. So I think you probably all know what the punishment for treason is with the Taliban. So it typically is death. So Daoud's family got this letter. Daoud actually persisted until he got a second letter, and and then was sent back to the United States. But this is an example of opportunity. Now, this is extreme courage here and extreme risk, but really anytime where you see opportunity is an opportunity to be courageous. So this is Alex Potu, who's from Wayne State University. So those of you who don't know where Wayne State is, so Wayne State is actually in the inner city of Detroit. And Alex, unlike most of the students at Wayne State, so Alex is actually a brother there at Wayne State, lives out in the country. And he had this idea of, what if we brought farm animals into Detroit, into Wayne State as a fundraiser? And I asked Alex, I said, well, were you kind of nervous? And he goes, oh yeah, I was really nervous because I was going to bring all these animals in and it was going to cost money to do it. And what if nobody showed up? So here's a little bit of the pictures. So anyway, it was a huge hit. He said we didn't raise a huge amount of money, $2,000. But again, this is an example of the testing point of opportunity. So another example, and this is a Florida State University football player by the name of Travis Rudolph. Now, Travis is not a Phi Gam. I wish he was a Phi Gam. But some of you may have seen the story. This is from a couple years ago. And Travis, as part of the outreach at Florida State University with the football team, was visiting a high school. And Travis noticed off in the distance a young boy by the name of Bo, who was sitting by himself, a table away. Travis didn't know about Bo. I mean, he didn't realize that, Bo was autistic. And he was, Bo was aware enough to know that he was being shunned, but autistic enough to not know how to do anything about it. And, Travis didn't know the anguish that, that Bo's mother felt every day knowing that Bo ate alone. But he picks up his tray and he moves over to the table and befriends Bo, and really changes a life. And this particular gesture led to the creation of what was called lunch bunches across the country, where people, once this went viral, where people at high schools were making sure that kids weren't alienated and going and sitting with kids that normally would be sitting alone. So this is opportunity. These are the testing points of opportunity. And sometimes these opportunities are on the other side of the world. Sometimes they're on your own campus, and sometimes they're 15 feet away at the table next to you. So the last one is accountability. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, just so we can stay on time here. But a quick example of this, all know the Elon Musk launch, and I love this quote, just came out yesterday, and they were interviewing him on CBS this morning, and he said, if it works, the credit goes to them, meaning the team, but if something goes wrong, it's my fault. So that's credibility, or that's accountability. That's what the testing point of accountability looks like. All right, so one of the other things that we talk about with all these testing points is this thread of vulnerability that runs through all of them. And what we really want people to do, what we want the brothers to do, is to recognize vulnerability and become comfortable with vulnerability. And that relates to, so we talked a little bit about the skills, and when we do the training, when I talked about a particular set of skills, the way this works is we take you through the steps of, first of all, recognizing the different testing points, accepting vulnerability, so not running away from vulnerability, but really accepting that vulnerability, looking at your values, figuring out a plan of action, and then learning from the experience. The other great thing about doing this is it's not like what they found in this Harvard study is it's not like we're born courageous. And what they're really finding in all these studies on courage is that it is a competency that can be built over time with practice. And the way we bring that in is through case studies. So when we do the longer B.C.L. training, which will start to roll out to the to different chapters, is we'll go through a lot of the stuff they just went through, and then we'll actually do case studies. So a lot of these case studies are actually real examples from the past that you would run into. And this is meant to sort of build that muscle and build that capability. And, you know, also, and what will happen with time is almost anything that you see, you'll start to recognize testing points. So if you look at the Houston Astros cheating scandal, and let's say you went to the Houston Astros as a new player and they were cheating, you'd have multiple testing points. You know, the testing point of stance. You know, do I stand up for how I feel about cheating? Intervention. Do I intervene and stop the cheating from happening? Accountability. If I participated in it, am I accountable for what happened? So these case studies are just great opportunities to really flex that muscle and to learn that, and that's a big part of building courageous leaders training. All right, so let's talk about the relevance of this to you. I'm going to just spend about 5 minutes here, and then we'll wrap things up. What I see as the huge advantage is when you are interviewing, the question is, and hopefully they'll ask this question about, tell us about your fraternity experience. And my hope for all of you, my dream for all of you, is that you'll be able to say to that recruiter, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, you know, I was in a fraternity, but I was in a different kind of fraternity. And we learned the skill called building courageous leaders. And let me give you an example of how that's different. And let me give you a story about it. So let me tell you a quick story. So when I was at General Mills, I used to be part of the recruiting team, and we would bring in MBAs from the top MBA schools across the country. And it was really interesting. So it was a real interest, you know, same process as like what I went through at Leo Burnett. And there would be 7 of us interviewing 7 candidates. And at the end of that, we would sit down and we would talk about the 7 candidates and figure out which ones that we were going to make an offer to. So I became just fascinated of, you know, why were certain people chosen and others not? And so I started to analyze what it was. Well, you know, why did we pick certain candidates? You know, because they all had great pedigrees. And I finally landed on this as what it was. And here it is. The candidate with the best stories wins. So what I discovered is during these discussions of all these candidates, we would go back and say, you know, Kevin or whoever it was told this story, and that story really stuck with me. So here it is. The candidates with the best stories wins. And there's 2 parts to this. One is the strength of the content and the stickiness of the story. So the strength of the content has to do with how compelling is your story. You know, what does it actually involve? And then the stickiness is the way in which you tell it. And the reason this matters is so, you know, part of what we teach with building courageous leaders is how do you make a story sticky? And you go through this process of the situation. What was the testing point that you came across? What was the action? What was the outcome? What did you learn? I didn't tell the Leo Burnett story exactly the way I normally tell it, but generally it followed that thing. I set up the situation. I talked about the testing point where I was challenged against my stance on cigarette smoking. I talked about what I did. I talked about the outcome. I talked about what I learned. When you tell a story in this way, it burns into people's minds. This is also what's called the hero's journey. So any Disney movie, any hero story follows this exact same arc. So the idea is to not run away from these testing points, but to actually have these testing points in your life, because those are the ones that make the stories. So the other thing that's sort of fascinating about this is when I give speeches, I will talk to graduate brothers and ask them, how many of you have had a testing point in your life? And I'll get hands with them. And so how many can you remember that in great detail? And what we find is with testing points, when you have these moments is you remember almost every detail. So my Leo Burnett example, I can picture the room. I remember the table. I remember where we were sitting. I remember the guy's stupid haircuts. I remember how tall he was. Almost every detail of that moment just sort of burned into my mind, and it just became very much something that was formative to me. And the reason that that's important, the reason it's important that these moments burn in, is because they've done a lot of research on memories. And what they find is that our memories create our narratives, okay, how we talk about our narratives. Our life narratives form our identity, and therefore our memories shape our identity. So if you think about these moments where you have these testing points, okay, those are the ones that burn into your mind, and those are the ones that become part of your narrative. Those form your identity, okay? So the reason these memories matter and the reason testing points matter is our most important memories make us who we are. So let me put a finer point on that. So there was a University of New Hampshire study, and again, I'm going through this quickly. During the training, I would spend much more time with you and the brothers. So here's a University of New Hampshire study that was recently done. So by the time most people are 25, they have the most important memories of their lives will have already happened. Okay, so I'm going to put even a finer point on that, is that there's something called the reminiscence bump, which is between the ages of 17 and 24, which is a 7-year window when most of your important memories imprint permanently. Okay, so you think about all of you right now are in that 17 to 24 age group. So if you come back to here, our most important memories make us who we are. And these testing point type situations are the kind that burn into our mind. Okay, so what that means is this is your choice. So how you react to these testing points, brothers, will determine what kind of person you become. It'll determine what kind of leader you become. It'll determine what kind of man that you become. So the choice is really yours on this, to determine again who you become in life. So again, this is kind of where I usually end the presentation, to talk about the relevance here, that these testing points are not just about doing the right thing, but they really are something that shapes your character and shapes your identity. So that's a bit of, so that's kind of just a really quick run through of what I do with the training and what B.C.L is all about. I wish I could do this in person. Unfortunately, I can't. But why don't we, Jake, why don't we open this up to questions here, and then I can kind of come back to some of the talking points. Is anybody still there?
Yeah.
Did I lose?
Yeah,
we've
still got people on.
All right.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim, for so much for sharing all of that. So yeah, like Jim said, let's open it up to questions. I mentioned it in the chat box, but right below you down here at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A feature. I'll give you all just a couple seconds, or I guess just 30 seconds to input your questions into there for Jim. Yeah, just there's no dumb questions. This is a safe space. Jim's here, and he has a lot of knowledge and wisdom, as you can tell, and he'd love to answer these questions.
So again, hopefully I didn't go too fast. It's my daughter, who's taking online classes right now, would have killed me if I'd gone on any longer. So.
All right, well, we've got a question in here. The question for you, Jim, is, what do you think is the best way to incorporate B.C.L and building courageous leaders into our chapter?
Yeah, well, I think probably the easiest, probably the most basic part would just be that there is a conversation around testing points. That if you can't accomplish if you can accomplish nothing else, to make that part of your language where you point them out to each other, that would be it. And, hopefully, we'll have some graduate brothers that will come in and start doing these case studies, but for the leadership of the fraternity, so people who are recruiting, people are doing pledge education, chapter officers, you've got to be using the term testing point again and again and pointing them out when you see them. So that would be the primary way. I think I saw another question come in there or chat.
Yeah. So Jim, this next question is, thank you for sharing these impactful stories. How did you respond after realizing you did not want to participate in marketing for tobacco companies?
How did they respond?
How did you respond after realizing you did not want to participate in marketing for tobacco companies? So how did you respond?
Yeah, well, part of what I talked about in the story is, I had to make that decision right there, on the spot is, what was more important to me, the job that I'd worked 6 years for, or going against my values and, potentially working on a business there. But it was panic. It was one of those moments. In terms of how I physically respond, is your heart's going like crazy, and it's like the whole world sort of stops, and you're going, man, am I throwing everything away? And I think that's how you feel in any of those situations. If you see hazing happening or whatever it might be, you're going, man, what's going to happen to me if I stand up for what I believe in, or what's going to happen to me if I intervene? And that's why the testing point in building courageous leader training is about slowing down and saying, okay, what I'm feeling here is that vulnerability, but who am I truly, and what do I believe in? And overcoming that natural tendency to just sort of flee the situation and not do what is right.
Thank you, Jim. And the next question here we have, do you have any ideas for how I can have my pledges practice putting these ideas of courageous leadership into place?
Oh boy, so I can have my pledges do it. Well, I'd love to hear their ideas on that. So, kind of what I was sort of hoping is, how could we have pledges put it in? It might be interesting to have them go through, maybe as part of pledge education, pick one of the testing points each week, maybe as one of the programs, and say, have them share examples of where they've experienced in their life. I think to the extent they can talk about what they've experienced is really helpful. Certainly the one on opportunity is one where you could, actually have as pledges to say, let's think about opportunity. What are some things that we could do as a pledge class? Or what do we stand for as a pledge class? Or what are some things that we can see that we might intervene on? So, intervention too, it isn't just the things that could be. Intervention could be a brother who's drinking too much. Intervention can be, hey, I'm seeing a brother who seems kind of depressed. And normally I might not approach it and say anything, but I go up to him and say, hey, dude, you seem like you haven't been yourself lately. That's a kind of intervention. So I would probably bring it up to the pledges and tee these things up and have them have discussion about it. So I don't know if how was that an okay answer, Jake? You can tell if that was crappy.
I think that was great. I think one thing that I would add is just, it starts with you all. It starts with you all initiated brothers in leading by example and continuing to basically just do everything that Jim said, because they're very impressionable new members, and they're going to take after what you do, and they're going to be able to be courageous leaders if they see you being a courageous leader, if they see you doing things that you should be doing. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah. I would even, it might be interesting as pledge educator or as new member educator is for you personally to share. Let's talk about stance. Here are the things that matter to me. Here are the things that I will stand up for. That if I see these values being violated beyond the fraternity values, I will stand up for. And so I think to Jake's point is you got to model that behavior. You got to model it.
Jim, this next question here says, what does courageous leadership look like in this pandemic? Are there ways we can show up when virtual is a testing point?
Well, so being someone, I'm 59, so I'm not quite in the vulnerable camp, but I'm close to it. So, the huge testing point right now is the social distancing, and while it may not affect you guys, you tend to be at your age, you can be asymptomatic spreaders and super spreaders. So there's a testing point right there about of doing what's right for the general population as opposed to the short term, what's more enjoyable to you. But what was the second? What was the other part of the question? Virtually.
And then it says, are there ways we can show up when virtual is a testing point? So I think what they mean is, are there ways that we could still be a courageous leader maybe and show up and do the things that we want to do in person, yet virtual, and using that as a testing point? I think that's where they're trying to go.
Yeah, I think in some ways it's maybe almost easier virtually because through the chat feature or whatever, you can put comments that you're sharing. You have time to sort of gather your thoughts where you might not in person. I think we've all been in those in-person meetings where you're going, man, I wish I had said something, or you think of the right thing to say 5 minutes after the meeting. I think being virtual, I think, gives you a little bit more time to gather your thoughts and to write it down. So I think maybe it's not something that is less difficult, more difficult, but I think it's actually less difficult in the virtual world because I think you have more time to gather your thoughts. So I hope that's where the question was going, but I'm not sure. So.
And here, this next question. So I had a situation recently within my own chapter involving somewhat of a fight or flight response.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know if you think, with B.C.L. in mind, that the flight response is something that you should always eventually turn into a fight response, or do you think that the flight response is a viable option that doesn't necessarily need to be molded into a fight response?
Yeah, so that's a great one. So somebody's a psych major there. So here's the thing is, I think there are times when the flight response is really about gathering yourself, okay, and kind of removing yourself from the situation and saying, okay, what is my approach here, and how am I going to figure it out? So let's take hazing for example. I took on hazing when I was a chapter president. And I immediately went fight as opposed to saying, let me think about this for a while. So it wasn't like pure flight, but it was kind of backing off for a bit and saying, okay, how could I assemble a team? How could I build a coalition to sort of battle it? Instead, I sort of took it on my own, and I was, pretty successful, but I sure took a beating. But in the process, but there are some situations where flight just isn't an option. So, for somebody's life is in danger, or there's underage drinking, or there's a situation that's gone too far where you just have to step in, even though every bone in your body is saying, I'm really vulnerable, I'm really dangerous here. But there will be definitely situations in my career and in my life where I say, okay, this is too hot for me right now. I don't have to fight it right now. I'm either too emotional or I don't know the right way to do this. And so I will flight back to figure out what is the right way to approach this or who is the right person to do it. So I hope that answers your question. So I don't think flight is always the wrong idea, but you do have to come back with a plan at some point.
Cool, Jim. We've got
Oh, he's a
Anthony
Spanish
says, I'm not a Spanish major, or I'm a Spanish major, not psych.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question, Anthony.
Yeah.
Looks like we do have just two more questions really fast. If that's okay with everyone. I know that we're cutting it close to that hour time limit that we said, but I think this is a good question. So how would you recommend mitigating social fallout when keeping stance at the testing point? For instance, my university was recently caught meddling with the student government election, and it seems like nobody else has begun spearheading the movement to keep the desired candidate elected. It's important to my chapter that the candidate with the most popular votes wins, but we fear the school will be more harsh on us if we make noise about it.
Yeah. So how do you mitigate fallout?
How would you recommend mitigating social fallout when keeping stance at the testing point?
Yeah. Part of stance is there's going to be fallout, right? That's part of the risk that's involved. But I think maybe, if I think back to my Leo Burnett story, and how might I have done that differently? And I think probably if I had said, listen, and I actually remember his name is Robert. So again, that's part of the whole memory. I said, Robert, let me ask you, let me respond to this question by telling you a little bit about my values and my core values and how important those are to me. And here are my core values, and here's why I feel that way. And so when you ask me that question, it may not violate one of your core values, but it does violate mine. And here's why, I'm going to do what I do, and I'm going to say what I say. So I think when you present it in that way, no one can fault you for being true to your core values. So if you state them up front, I think it does mitigate the fallout, because they can at least say, okay, I respect you for that. I don't agree with you, but I at least respect you for staying true to your values. So does that make sense?
Thank you, Jim. And we have one last question, and then we'll have answered them all unless anyone else has more questions. But this last one is from your professional experience. How can we use courageous leadership to differentiate ourselves during recruitment?
Yeah, so so I had a slide here called talking points, and I left it purposely blank because what I really wanted to hear based upon what I presented here was what do you all think is meaningful to undergrads your age? So what resonates with all of you? So I would, rather than a 59-year-old telling you what will resonate to a 17 or to a 17, 18-year-old, I'm going to give you guys homework. So I want you to think of everything that I shared with you today. Because Jake, they're all going to be back together for the next session, right?
Yes.
So I would start off with that homework to have everybody on chat to talk about what do they think are the most compelling points that they would use for the presentation. So I don't mean this as a dodge. I mean, I can give you my thoughts on what they are, but I don't, I work in the marketing and the new products world. And the last thing that you want to do in marketing and new products is have a 59-year-old speak for your target audience. So you guys have a good sense for it. So think about all those different aspects that I talked about. So it's a bit of a dodge, but I think it's going to be much more valuable for you all to share with each other what you think are the most compelling points. So who was it? Was that an acceptable answer? Who was that from?
Anonymous. So I'm not sure, but that's okay.
All right.
Anonymous is good too.
Well, I hope I didn't sleaze my way out of that one.
Actually, a really good segue into that I want you all I know some of you are already a part of this group, but for those of you who don't know, we have a Facebook page, Phi Gamma Delta Summit Series. So we would love for you all to join that Summit Series Facebook page if you're not on that already. This is a great way for us all to collaborate, talk, answer these questions more, or give more context or more things that you might be doing in this chat. Or you can search Phi Gamma Delta Summit Series, obviously. Thank you. But yeah, we want you to join this group. We've already had a lot of great things come out of it, and especially because we want you all to join our small group, which is in 2 weeks. And I'm going to share my screen with you all here really fast with the schedule for those. Let me make sure I get the right one here. So I'm going to share my screen here for you all here. Not that. So these are some of the dates for our future events. Thank you all for staying on a few minutes after 7. So we have currently May 28th, Courageous Leader Track. It's for all participants, whether you're a recruitment chairman or a member educator. I know we have a couple campus professionals on here with us, as well as graduate brothers. But June 11th, so for those of you who are new member educators, we'll have a track for you all. We're talking about building that team, Big Brother, new member education committees, and recruitment chairman who'll be talking about making strangers acquaintances. So in our first small group, we talked about how we're finding those strangers. Now we're talking about how we make them more into acquaintances and people that we know. And so with that, we also want to announce that we have a couple things that we'll be doing for everyone who attends these next sessions. So for those of you who are on this call, you have a great way to start this off and get moving. The first thing that we're going to be doing, so we want this Summit Series to act as professional development for you all. We want it to act as a way to not just be something to advance your fraternal education and what you're doing inside your chapter, but also how it's going to help you professionally with your career down the line. And so what we're doing is we're creating certificates for you all. And let me see if I can share those here, just so you all can see what I'm talking about. So this is one of the certificates that you all will get. So if you're a new member educator, you will get a certificate that, once again, you can add to LinkedIn. You can do whatever you want, but it specifically recognizes you for your work in learning how educational programming will work and really understand how to create that plan. And then and then there will also be one for recruitment chairman in regards to organizational growth. So that's really cool. That's one thing we're really great. We're really glad to have and be able to give you all if you attend the rest of these small group and big group sessions. And then the next thing that I would like to announce as well, we will be doing scholarships for you all who attend. So not only will you be able to achieve and get this certificate, but you'll also be able to, there will be some sort of a raffle where 4 chapters will receive a $500 scholarship that will go towards recruitment and towards your new members. So when you're recruiting men, you have $500 to basically give however you want, whether that's for academics, for being a courageous leader, etc. So we'll be giving out 4 of those scholarships of $500 for you all that continue to attend every event moving forward. That's the rest of these courageous leader tracks. We've got some great speakers like Jim Link at the June, July, and August dates. And then also these small group chats, these small groups on June 11th, July 9th, and August 13th. We're going to be able to really talk and engage. It won't be a webinar version. It'll be more of a meeting version. We had a great first group 2 weeks ago. We're excited to keep that going. We're excited to give you all these scholarships, give you these certificates, so you can feel like you're really learning something, you're getting something out of this, and you're really able to make the best for your chapter moving forward in this kind of crazy time. So with that, I think that is all we have for you. We appreciate you so much for logging on and being here with us and listening to Jim. Jim, I want to say thank you again so much for doing this and agreeing to speak. Once again, take a picture of these dates, learn them, love them. We're excited to continue to see you at these small groups, the rest of these big groups throughout the summer. I know that we're all bored, stuck inside, so an hour isn't too bad. And once again, join the Phi Gamma Delta Summit Series Facebook page. We'd love to have you in there collaborating, answering questions, and really having a good time. And with your fellow numeraire educators and recruitment chairmen, we're doing this so you all can collaborate, since most of you are in your same roles. That once again is not just for recruitment chairmen and numeraire educators. You know, if you're a campus professional, if you are a graduate brother, we encourage you to be in that group, because we want your knowledge. We want you to be able to bring your insight to this all, so we can continue to make everyone, this whole group, better. So once again, thank you, Jim. Do you have any closing thoughts?
No, like I just said in the very beginning, you know, when you're in a leadership role, these glasses have glare on. When you're in a leadership role in a difficult time, remember the formula about testing points, the story arc about situation, testing points, action. What you're going through right now are one of those stories. Remember, I said the candidate with the best stories wins. You're gonna come out of this experience with some of those stories because of the challenge. And so that's why I said at the very beginning, while you might be thinking, geez, I didn't get an internship, I'm doing whatever. This experience is going to be greater than any internship because of the challenge that's inherent to it. So embrace it and know that this is of great value. And I just thank all of you on behalf of the fraternity and the Archons for embracing leadership. And there's a lot of people that can run from it in times like this, and you guys are moving toward it, and you're being part of us figuring this out. So thanks to all of you. Jake, thank you for your leadership and bringing this all together and making it happen.
Thank you, Jim. We appreciate you. Thank you, everyone. And I think that's all we have for you. Once again, we'll see you in 2 weeks on June 11th for those small groups. Can't wait to have you. If you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to email me at jlueck@flagame.org. We'd love to answer any questions on that Facebook page. So thank you, brothers. Have a good night. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thanks, Jake.